Welcome back to our afternoon session here on day 13 of the expanded virtual conference for conscious capitalism. I am really excited to bring this next panel conversation to all of you. We are going to be talking about how to support mission-aligned investment. And we have three truly global thought leaders and actors in this field that I think you will be able to learn a lot from. They are all game changers in their own rights. And I'm going to give you a brief overview of their backgrounds before we hop into what I think will be a very engaging and insightful conversation. First up, we have Gary Moon with Influence Partners. Gary works and plays at the intersection of capitalism, consciousness, and social impact. He's the managing partner at Influence, which is a boutique investment firm where he and his team work with entrepreneurs, executives, and investors on raising capital, mergers and acquisitions, with a core focus on mission-aligned businesses, the companies that are putting purpose beyond profit. And then in collaboration with us here at Conscious Capitalism, Gary co-created the Mission Aligned Growth Summit, which is a learning community around these topics. And we typically have an annual conference in person, but we will see where that brings us this year, considering our current circumstances. Gary and his partner Maria have 5 kids between them, ranging from 5 to 23. And in normal times, you will find them traveling around the world on various internal and external adventures. Gary is working on a worthy practical problem to bring more consciousness into finance, both broadly within the company investor acquire ecosystem, as well as through investment banking cultures. Welcome, Gary. We also have Alexandra Stanton joining us from Empire Global Ventures. She is the CEO there, and as an attorney with a proven record of executive leadership in business development, technology, organizational development, and public-private partnerships. Alexandra has established operations in multiple foreign markets, including China, India, and Turkey, and raised venture and working capital for expansion and development, identified US and foreign partners for joint ventures, and facilitated export promotion to and from the US. Her corporate focus ranges broadly from developing large multinationals to launching homegrown startups. As a contributor to Fast Company, she is widely recognized for her experience in assisting female founders. Welcome, Alexandra. We also have Lawrence Ford joining us today. He is the founder and CEO of Conscious Capital Wealth Management. He was dubbed the shaman of Wall Street by the Washington Post, and the Economics magazine referred to Lawrence as a man of two worlds. NPR has named him the finance guru, and Retirement Income Journal has dubbed him as the spiritual advisor. Through his collaboration with some of the world's best thought and action leaders, he founded Future Capital in partnership with the United Nations and the World Academy of Arts and Sciences, working on a project for a new paradigm for our civilization. He has dedicated much of his life to being a bridge between the modern world of business and the ancient world of wisdom, and the nexus of consciousness and capital. So I am thrilled to welcome you as well, Lawrence, to this, what will be a powerhouse of a panel conversation. I'd like to invite, you're welcome. I'd like to invite Lawrence to kick us off with a start of the conversation.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I know you have a choice of where you're spending all of your time today, and I really appreciate you being here to listen with us. And Alexandra and Gary, it's an honor to be here with you. And Amanda, again, thank you for having me. So I thought we would start today. We're going to talk a little bit about value-based leadership and what that means in the world of public companies, private companies, and life in general. And clearly, the times today are a little bit different than normal, which is probably the understatement of the day. And, you know, it's a range of emotions where we all are in our lives. I mean, half of our country has less than $400 saved. And so clearly the economic pressures on them today are very different than other people who are sitting and being able to look at this time as a spiritual time for growth or otherwise for just general introspection. But regardless of where you are and where you find yourself today, I thought we'd start this morning or this afternoon with a little bit of self-introspection. Like, where are we? Because all leadership begins from inside. whether it's a large company or whether it's us personally in our family life. And we're all been set with a really, really interesting set of circumstances right now, where one way of thinking about it is our mother has all sent us to our corners of our room to sit and think about what we have done. And one of the most difficult things we can do in life as individuals is to actually sit and be with ourselves. Because it's so easy to have all of the other stimulation that runs around us all day long, to keep us away from the things inside of us that are itching for growth and itching for attention, that drive us to be our true selves. And all great leaders, as we all know, whether it's the CEO of a corporation or whether it's a mother of a family, come from an authentic, beautiful place inside first. And so I thought maybe we'd all start with a little bit of a pause today to spend a minute in silence and really come present, and also come present with perhaps maybe the perspective of some self-compassion about understanding that this is difficult, regardless of the situation you're in, to be sitting with yourself and being, with your family on top of you. And, little, as we were talking about before, maybe footsteps running on top of us right now as we're all settling in to be with you. So why don't we all just settle for a minute and just have a few deep breaths. And one of the things that I want to share with you in this practice is we've all probably had different styles of internal introspection of our own leadership of ourself, whether we say that's meditation or just quietude. And I'd like to share with you briefly a little exercise that you can take with you through this time. And then we can all do a little bit here to start. And the shamans of the world, some of the ancient wisdom, indigenous wisdom, when they come to this part of the world, and it's not exclusive to here, but I'll just speak to this part of the world because it's my experience when they come to visit, will look around and see us all running around and think about, oh my gosh, nobody's here. They're all sleepwalking. Everybody's moving from A to B to A to B, back and forth, and nobody's here. And they come from this beautiful, innocent perspective of seeing us and realizing that we're all asleep. And I was just having a chat with Alexandra before we started, and she was talking about the streets of Manhattan. Even after 9/11, there were people coming together with hugs. And now we're really we're being forced into our corners of quietude. And it's really forcing us, maybe for the first time, to see ourselves and see others. And so the internal practice that I'll share with you is something that the shamans will call stalking. Don't get nervous about it. It's not what you think. So take yourself out of yourself. And what you do is just take a look at your thoughts. It's really that simple. And as we all know, some of the most simple things in the world can be the most profound and also the most difficult. So I will take you through this practice briefly, and then you can take it with you throughout the next time period of when we're forced to be by ourselves, which hopefully will be ending soon. So the first thing that you do is you give the brain a little game, because the brain likes to be in charge, and the brain's job is to create and solve problems, right? So let's give it a problem to create and solve. And so what we do is we play a game, and you sit in quiet. So give yourself a little space. And what you do is look at your thoughts. And the game is you start labeling your thoughts. So we give it one of three labels. We give it either a present thought, we give it a label of a past thought, or we give it a label of a future thought. And after training this with thousands of people all over the world, I've realized there's also another one, which is I'm not quite sure, just give it a question mark. If you're not quite sure what to label it, so you don't get too caught up in it. But I will demonstrate for you how this works. My disclaimer is that I'm going to do it live and do it authentically, so I don't know what's going to come out. So there's my warning. So I'm going to sit, and I'll take a couple breaths. And if you all want to join me, you can just watch as I demonstrate, and then we can do it all together briefly. So I have a thought, and I breathe that thought in, and I label it present. And my present thought was, Amanda, how blessed I am to have you doing this with us today. and to be here present. And so that's a present thought. So I literally breathe it in, accentuate my breath, especially in this time when our lungs are being attacked by the virus, with gratitude for the breath. So I breathe that in and then I let it out. As I label it, I let it out. I let that thought go and I come back and I play again. And there's a past thought to me right away. Breathe in, and I'm going to label it past, and I'm going to blow it out. And it will, for some, I told you, warning, some random reason, I was thinking about the breakfast I had this morning. So you guys get the idea. This is the game, and it's a very, very powerful game if you can play this throughout your life and bring along with it a lot of self-compassion and love for yourself. And know that what this means, regardless of where you are in your life, is all great leadership, as we're going to be talking about, comes from the inside out first.
It was beautiful, Lawrence. Thank you.
Welcome.
So hopefully everyone had a chance to go through that exercise with a few breaths. And I think that is something that I know I will certainly be using and even teaching my kids. I think that's a really helpful way of just being in tune with what's going on inside, and whether you're a kid running around quarantined with your family, for extended periods of times, as we talked about, or you're a CEO, leading a company, or an investor, looking inside, I think is an incredibly valuable experience. So I think it's a great way to start this conversation off, and, the connection to those inner values and what that means when we do turn to the world of finance. And I wonder, with the vast experience that the three of you have, and all of the things that have changed over recent times, are you seeing some interesting examples of what leaders are doing around the world or in this space that we could point to? And Lawrence, I might start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I will go to giving back, right? So we see so much giving back now. And some of the examples I see of some of these public corporations are just the vast amount of beautiful things that some of these purpose-based corporations are doing so naturally because it's part of their DNA, and doing things like, offering to share, making sure that people are covered and taken care of at their homes. And if they need to be home, making sure they support them to be able to work remote. And then we're seeing signs, contrast, of some of these companies that just don't have that type of leadership in their DNA. Conscious Capitalism has been speaking about it forever. My friend Raj Sisodia, co-wrote the book, Firms of Endearment, many, many years ago, talking about how great corporations with values of, purpose, culture, stakeholder care throughout the whole stakeholder commitment and pure leadership from the inside will do better and perform better potentially over long periods. And, this whole virus, to me, when I look at it, has really, whether it's internally, the stuff that's bothering us that we need to work on to become better people, or as a company, the things that really are kind of out of alignment with the way things should be, it's really been about like this big magnifying glass. So I'll tell you a story, which is not so uplifting, but it will give a good contrast to the other side of it. We were on the phone with one of our clients the other day, who was a wonderful young couple. We deal with some people going through transition and crisis as well as our values. And this couple had a very traumatic thing happen to them. And because of the settlement, came into a significant amount of capital. And we often will have referrals that way. So there's kind of the backdrop. And they work at everyday jobs still, just like they used to before they had that money. And we had a call, and the firm, they have 3 disabled children, and the firm that he works with was not practicing any kind of safety measures at all through this process. And someone was found with the virus. So he went to his boss, and the boss is basically saying, you guys can do whatever you want to do. We think we're fine here. We're going to start wearing masks. And he says, well, wait a minute, I've got some kids at home. If I bring this home, it's a death sentence. What should I do? Well, you know what their solution was? It was about going on a family medical leave so they didn't have to pay them any more money. And so the client's coming to us because he's like, we need to take more money out. And I'm thinking to myself, and we wonder why these corporations, where people feel like they're just cogs in the wheel, are imprisoned and have no heart and soul and no purpose beyond profit. And, we're starting to see the good news is, the performance, which I'm sure we'll talk later with some of these public companies, are beginning to continually outperform because people have had enough of that type of leadership and companies. So there's a kind of a juxtaposition of what I'm seeing out there, but with a lot of hope of the good guys and gals continuing to be winners out there in the world.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. And it's unfortunate, the circumstance of it, but I think it's also the reality of what we are all facing and the way that certain companies and certain industries, do business, amidst a crisis or not, their regular day to day. And so I think there is that silver lining and opportunity as we move forward. Before I move on to our next panelist, just wanted to let everyone know that we are going to be taking questions throughout this conversation. And so if you would like to ask a question of our panelists, you can use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to type in a question, and we will be using those and filtering those throughout the conversation. So we look forward to getting those from you as well. I want to move to you next, Alexandra, because I know that a hallmark of a lot of your work is in this opportunity of bringing the public and private sector together. And I'm curious if there are some examples that you might be able to share of maybe the positive side of what's happening or the challenges that are being overcome right now, speaking about this connection to those inner values as leaders.
For sure. And thank you for having me, Amanda, and to my panelists, Gary and Lawrence. Thank you as well. This is an extraordinary moment, both because of this terrible pandemic we're living through. I'm in New York City, I'm in the eye of the storm. But if you think that necessity is the mother of invention, to pick up on Lawrence's aforementioned maternal theme, then this is an amazing opportunity to both do good and do well. So what do I mean by that? We do a lot of work in scaling companies in the medtech wellness space and doing their business development. And you're right, we do have a deep expertise in the public-private partnerships. I used to run economic development for New York State. And because good ideas aren't limited to a certain demographic or ethnicity or race or gender, they come in all shapes and sizes. Well, at this point, the FDA and the EPA have fast-track processes in place. States have relaxed procurement rules. I'm getting called every few days, Illinois, California, Florida, Texas, Pennsylvania, New York City and New York State, unions, hospitals saying, what do you have that can help us? Look, no one has R&D anymore, right? All you know is what walks in your door. So you don't know what you don't know. This is a time where people see themselves as possibly being leaders. So that goes back to Lawrence's piece, right? How do you see yourself? This is not the time to passively wait for folks to come to you, right? This is the time to step forward. In the coronavirus supply chain, as I call it, we've taken on 5 new companies in the past 2 weeks. One is called Rapid Oxygen, for example. It's a portable oxygen device, temperature stable, doesn't blow up, couple pounds. And given that coronavirus attacks the lungs, and also, if you go down on oxygen, you have cognitive impairment. This device, for which they've chopped the price in half because they're good people and they just want to get it out there, is having a heyday. American made in the Northeast. And they said, look, how can we help? Can we give some of these to the 300 childcare centers set up in New York City for the children of essential workers? Can we get them? We're seeing articles about nursing homes and senior assisted living facilities. How can we participate? Sure, is it good business ultimately? Of course, good values make good business, and we see those things as very interconnected. But it's also a time, if you think that historically capital, which we'll talk about later, but is often reserved for people who are, let's say, not diverse, not female, right? And that's been hard for women, people of color to break in. There is an ability now to break through. And we work with all sorts of entrepreneurs. Half of our clients are women. Many of our clients are diverse. We run a diverse team. We very much believe that who ends up in tech is a lot about who starts in tech. And, to be consistent, you got to lock it at both ends. So we're seeing companies fly through the regulatory process. There's a company out of the Brooklyn Navy Yard that called and they said, we're on the verge of X, but we haven't gone through the EPA. I said, we'll get you through in a week. We flew through in 3 days. Now we're getting it to New Jersey, Amanda, to your home state. So the point is, you have to have the heft, the profundity, and the self-belief that this is your moment and you can go. No one's going to come to you and say, if you don't do this yourself, right? So that's one piece of it. The second piece is we're only in the first phase of innovation around the supply chain, right? The next phase is going to be, a company came to us, Dutch company out of the Middle East, medical mobile testing units for coronavirus, right? Think about it. We can't all line up 1,000 deep outside the major hospitals. How do you go to public housing in the poorest areas of town? Mobile units. Well, they're outfitting right now. We're going to help them. So there are great ideas to serve this emergency. It has larger lessons to teach us about what leadership looks like, and saying, pick me. I can do this, right? That often, Amanda, doesn't come in people who look like you and me or people who are diverse. This is the time. So we're getting a lot of very interesting calls coming to the fore, and governments are eager to take a shot in this moment. So absolutely, hands down, there's that. I would also say that innovation landscape we feel will remain for at least a year after this, because the next phase, if you think about it, how do we disinfect school kids a year from now when they walk into school and when they leave, or when they're in their lunchroom, right? In a way that's not toxic. How do you disinfect the stock exchange 3 times a day? How do you, right? The big banks, how do you, right? The universities. That next phase, once you're through, can you get me 5 million gallons, which is a call that came at midnight last night. And I'll get to that in a second. Those calls for more innovation and help us get back to work in a safe way, those calls will continue to roll. And I think if we want to lead with good values here, we need to make the space in our business practices to welcome those calls. Not all will be ready, but we can help them along the way. So we've just decided at Empire Global, because even though our name is Empire Global Ventures, we're not a VC. We do business development in a very granular, muscular way. And we're just devoting, 20% of our time, of all of our team, to just those inbound calls. If they don't sound perfectly right, we're going to take some time with them anyway. Everyone's just going to get a 15-minute slot no matter who they are. This is the moment to, in this American fabric and our American community, I think, have that spirit of openness. So that's an important piece, I think, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And what brings me a lot of hope is we've spoken with dozens of thought leaders from a wide range of industries around the world over the past couple of weeks with this conference. And the thing that I keep hearing is this connection to communications. And, as what you just shared there, even if it's only 15 minutes and even if you can't find the solution, listening, and the more pieces of information we have, the better we are all equipped to put those puzzles together. And so I just love hearing that theme resonate so strongly with everyone that we're speaking with. So Gary, I actually want to move to you and pick up on an additional theme that Alexandra shared about how this being an opportunity to stand up and be seen as a leader and be counted as a leader. And I know that your firm works a lot with companies that are in that growth stage. And so certainly that has changed a lot, what growth means like, in these days, but I'm sure that you are seeing some really interesting practices, decisions, processes being created by leaders who really want to do investment differently. What can you share with us about that, those examples in the space you're working in?
Yeah, thanks, Amanda and Alexandra and Lawrence. Pleasure to be on a panel with you. Appreciate it. I thought it'd be sort of interesting to play a little game, and I've got 3 stories, and it's which one is the conscious capitalist? And and these are live conversations we've had. Today we're spending a lot of time with folks, whether it's investors or CEOs, around capital planning, because the world has changed fairly dramatically, as we all know. So story number one, company is a technology provider into retail and commercial real estate. Within a week of things going sideways, the CEO stepped forward, cut 35% of his staff, right-sized the organization, and started moving forward with how they do the business a little differently. CEO number two in the advertising industry only made some very selective cuts. I think it runs an organization of about 100 people, made 3 trims, if you will, to the team. And despite some significant disruptions to revenue, he kept the team largely intact. And then story number 3 is the senior management team got together, decided that there was an income level line, if you will, and everybody above that line volunteered to take a pay cut, and everybody below that line was kept at their regular compensation package. So the reality is all 3 of them are conscious capitalists. And so, what is the theme there? Theme number 1, there's no single right answer in this kind of an environment. Each of those decisions was made for very specific reasons. Some of them have a little more hope built into them than others, for certain. But each of them was done with the CEO and senior management team having a very strong pulse on the financial operations of their business. So if you take the CEO who did not make many cuts at all, they've actually got 4 base scenarios of what happens in this next quarter to either keep the team intact or do what they need to do coming out of a lower quarter. But the thing I would also, to your point on communications earlier, all of those are done with very high levels of communication internally, done with a lot of transparency internally, and also done with a lot of communication with their investors. So as you can imagine, especially companies with different kinds of investors, there's a wide range of opinion on what's the right decision. But sort of the net outcome is those are very frequent communications in a very dynamic environment.
Yeah, and I appreciated the kind of setup there for that conversation. So I'm sure many of our listeners were also thinking the same thing. Is there a distinction there? And we've been talking a lot during this conference and just in general in the community. There's not one way to practice conscious capitalism, during day-to-day operations or amidst a challenge, and it looks different depending on the context and where you are inside of your company. So thank you for giving some additional color and depth to what these times look like for folks in this space. Looks like we have lost Alexandra for a period of time, so we're working on, the rest of the team is working on getting her back there, but I do want to keep moving forward with the conversation until she's able to rejoin us. And I think this might be a good time to, make the transition from what we're talking about as opportunities as individuals and inside of the companies on the operational side of what you do right now, to how we can support this in a very specific investment side of things when it comes to capital. Are you guys seeing this as a opportunity to move towards more values aligned decisions and conscious capitalism, as we would say, and purpose-led investment? Or are you seeing there being a shrinking and a contrast back towards more traditional setups because of the challenges that we're facing? And we're glad you're Black, Alexandra. We're making the transition over to the capital side of the conversation. So Gary, you're still unmuted. Do you want to start us off on this part of the conversation?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is there's a lot of noise out there. And so, I would really encourage people in, any kind of a situation around this question to go beyond headlines, to go beyond and really get into the specifics of what's relevant to them. Because even with a relatively sophisticated set of investors and CEOs we work with, we're constantly moving people in the direction of what's relevant and what's not. So that's first. To your question specifically, I would frame it a little differently. And that is, kind of two main points. On the investing side itself, what we like to say in contractions like this is the tourists tend to go away, right? And so people who were nibbling, or maybe this is a good idea, or it's not really core in the essence of what they're doing, those people tend to go away in markets like this. So, the good news is that clears the field for a lot of people who this is fundamentally at the end of the day, who they are as people. And so if you focus on that group, the general feeling is this is something whether you accelerate the dollars or not, but you might go from investing 20% to investing 50% or 100%. Now is the time to really double down on your value system coming out of this. The second thing that I would say is in any investor conversation, now is just a beautifully perfect time to be able to see the talk versus walk gap. Because there are a lot of people who say a lot of things. And then, when it's time to test the metal, you see what actually happens. And so that's something that we really appreciate and encourage entrepreneurs and executives to focus on right now. And just some of those examples are around how you handle stakeholders in a difficult situation where dollars are scarce, investors who are honestly quite admirably sticking to term sheets that they may have written in January and February, despite very significant value and valuation deterioration since then. So, this, as we like to say internally, in the financial world, this is where firms, sort of make it or lose it from a reputation perspective in how they approach the business.
Yeah, that certainly makes a lot of sense. And I wanna move to the shaman of Wall Street here, Lawrence, and ask you, as someone who has certainly seen many crises and changes and fluctuations, in the market and otherwise throughout the course of your career, what kind of lessons might have seen there, and are there new opportunities that are coming about because of the current situation that we're in?
Thank you for that question. Yes. So let's right that exercise at the beginning. There was actually a purpose to that with investing, believe it or not. So one of the amazing things that happens when we truly, as I was talking about, everybody, the indigenous wisdom sees us sleepwalking. When we actually come and wake up, a couple things really happen. That internal growth that's forced, that we can't hide from anymore. And in doing so, we become more ourselves. And I heard Alexandra say so beautifully, it's like, it's time to go now, right? I mean, put it on the go button and go shine, stop hiding. We need everybody out there. One of the other things that happens is that we come to this place And we all come in different ways to this place, but we come to this level of awareness that we are all interconnected. And it's not some sort of ethereal kind of concept. And the one gift this virus has brought to us is whether it's through our breath or whether it's through our markets, we are all deeply interconnected. And that delusion that somehow we're separate gets thrown out of the window really quickly. And so one of the things that I want to talk about is in the public equity markets, and for everybody who's investing, regardless of what level they're at, whether they're investing in private deals or whether they're investing in public deals, just with their 401k and their IRA, it becomes pretty clear when we realize we're all connected and that we wake up to the reality of life is that for most good people, they would rather not have their money degradate the earth or support child labor in a third world country. And the beautiful thing that's happening that we're starting to see now, understand this is temporary because it's a very short period of time. But one of the expressions is I was saying earlier that we're putting a light on everything now, that to what was, we're starting to see examples, indications of the good guys and gals companies actually performing better in this short term. So there's an article that's just done by John from Morningstar that just talked about all of the companies that are in the environmental, social, and governance state that have actually outperformed during this down period of time. Now, there are some realistic examples to that. Of course, there's a lot less exposure to oil and gas. So there's some fairly left brain ways to think about that. But we're also seeing that the good companies, you can really do good and do well out there in the world, regardless of where you're investing. So the power that we all have to put our money towards a world where we'd like it to be better, where we don't have to necessarily in any way sacrifice returns. I mean, it's why not? And if we all kind of use that example now to move our monies into those areas, boy, what a change we can make with this tool called capitalism that we've created, which, by the way, what the heck is it anyway? It's just something we've made up. So let's use this powerful tool during this time to make some deep changes. And we're starting to see some very, very real examples in these markets about performance. And I think we will continue to see that as we go forward. Imagine that individual that I talked about earlier. Do you think he's going to want to stay with that company or find a new company once this finishes up? I mean, I think that is pretty obvious. Yeah. So those companies are going to lose that talent to the good people who want to flock to companies that have a heart and a soul and care about purpose and profit. So it doesn't take much to figure out why those companies long-term are going to outperform in many ways, as long as the rest is managed well. So really exciting stuff we're seeing out there.
Yeah, I think so for sure. And oh, Alexandra, you're muted. 1 second.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I want to pick up on something that Lawrence talked about. There are the investment opportunities. Gary talked about, going from 20% to 50 or 100% and really doubling down on mission-driven and purpose-driven investments for sure. And there are some really interesting investments out there. I think the other piece that I think you, Lawrence, were touching on, it's about relationships. So the person at the Fortune 100 who acts in a decent way, that becomes your experience of the face of that company. I have a client actually who's literally an early stage company who's in full diligence and it's going forward. 2 of the founding deals that attracted these other investors, one is with Nike, one is with Peloton. They're holding. Both those people out of Nike and Peloton called at the beginning of this and said, we're not walking away. We may have to put some things on hold because no one can travel, but we got you and we're good. And I want to call that out because it's a kind of individualized behavior, perhaps not seen from more nameless, faceless, corporations. But first of all, banana is fantastic. Yay, right? Wonderful. Second of all, I'm here talking about them. So it's 4 weeks ago and it still left an impression on me. And every couple of weeks, I'll just email and say, how you doing? They say, I was going to email you. How are you doing? How are you guys doing? There are sentient, decent people behind a lot of these mega corporations. One should never not give people a chance. So that's one lesson in this moment, right? They can be not out of the most obviously consciously capitalist countries, but companies, but I think that we will find that many people who work maybe out of more canonical corporations are still stepping forward in a decent way. I, on a personal level, find that decency buoying, and I gain a lot of strength from it. So I would say it's two takeaways for me. One is great investment opportunities like you and Gary were talking about. And there really is, I think we're going to see, as opposed to the person you just mentioned, they're not going to do business with that company again, right? I'm seeing some great corporate behavior out of some major multi-billion-dollar companies that makes me want to do future work with them and check in on a human level with them more. And isn't that one of the ways that we're going to get through this period? Again, good values makes good business, right? So I keep dovetailing right back to that.
Well, and if I could just add on to that point, Alexandra, I think one of the roles that we all play, and I mean everyone on the call, is that you can, at least in my experience in the last month, people are much more influenceable to embed these values in. And so we're working in a couple of situations on the M&A side of the business where we're acting on behalf of buyers. And this provides a really good opportunity to be able to advise why the values matter, right? And how this negotiation goes or how it goes with this counterparty. What that means as it propagates out. And so neither of those cases is our management teams, you know, sort of fully in the conscious capitalism circle, if you will. But as we like to say, they're conscious capitalisms without the label, capitalists without the label, right? And so they're good people who can be taught, influenced, and inspired in certain ways. Now, listen, at the end of the day, it's our job to negotiate on their behalf. So that doesn't mean we're not negotiating hard on things, but you know, we're drawing certain boundaries around behavior and how you constitute a deal, and the amount of receptivity to those ideas is pretty high right now.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and you know, to bring it back, it's just, it's you know, faking caring gets very difficult in crisis, right? I mean, so we get to shine. You know, the first thing we said, you know, as a leader of Conscious Capital, I said to everybody, I'm like, okay, well, what do we do? You know, here we are in a bit of shock. Let's all come together. Number one, you know, I don't have to have all the answers. I certainly don't. Let's come together. Let's figure it out. And guess what all our instinct was? When in doubt, give back. So once a week, we've started doing this really cool show on health and wealth that's growing. Our numbers are growing off the charts. We do the first half with market strategy and answer questions. And the second half, we bring in a leader on the health side, whether it's, you know, spiritual, ancient wisdom. And, you know, it's just because we didn't know what else to do. But, you know, when you really care, there's no other way to do it than just give back, right? And what you do that with a good business acumen so you can be sustainable and grow a solid company. But that type of leadership is like we're all talking about is, you know, baked in the DNA of these companies. And Alexandra, like you said, I think, you know, just when companies become such big companies, doesn't mean that they're the bad guys, right? Or girls. It's there's pockets that can grow from within and then add exponentially can make huge changes, even bigger than small companies sometimes as their growth, right?
Yep, for sure.
Yeah, I want to pick up on this theme of giving back and what is, I think, the natural inclination of many people, particularly people that would be listening to our conversation now in the conscious capitalism community, is if people are in a position right now to be supportive of, you know, finding ways to support mission-aligned investment. What are some ways they might be able to get involved? If this is a new space for them, this is something that we often try to catalyze at the Mission Aligned Growth Summit when we have that event in person. Are there some ways if listeners either have capital or are looking to get involved or want to be supportive that you're seeing in the spaces you're in that they can get connected if they haven't been before? I think one way is certainly the calls that you just mentioned, Lawrence, just to learn a little bit about the space. So we'll be sure to share that information for anybody
Sure.
that is interested. We'll make that connection. I know I've been on some of those calls and they have been fantastic. So I don't know if that might help us start with thinking about
so
ways.
I'll tell you, I'll come with a little bit of a leadership, just tee it off to you guys from kind of a framing from an advisor point of view, right? So know, first of all, where you are, right? I mean, if you have a lot of discretionary wealth that you can take higher risks, then know you're in that place and be responsible about that, where you go within your intentional conscious investing. And be careful when you start to hear, as Gary was saying, a lot of the noise and news and stuff out there in the headlines. It can be dangerous too when you come from a heart and say, look, I haven't been conscious about where my investments are, and I want to make a shift in my core investments. I love this old phrase by a wise seer. It's like, trust in God, but tie your camel. So make sure you follow basic fundamentals still, Conscious investing is good, but so is good, diverse asset allocation and modern portfolio theory and your pie chart about your risk tolerance, right? So don't let any of that go. I see that happen sometimes when people get a little bit exuberant. And then understand where you're at in the framing of this. So for the language that I'm speaking to everybody is primarily in, the public markets, your core investments that matter for your future. As you move out, you can get into the more impact range, which Alexandra and Gary can speak about.
I would say there are two pieces helpful for anyone trying to get into this space who is new to the area. One is it's helpful if you know your passions before you talk to someone. Is sustainability what you care about? Is it smart cities? Is it mobility? I have this wonderful new client we're working with. She's doing autonomous vehicles for folks with disabilities, veterans, seniors. Let the folks who want to ape, Elon Musk and Tesla go bro it out over there. Her mission is to help people. And if she just won the Detroit Auto Show, so I would figure out what your passion is. That's number one, and what really moves you. And the second thing is, whoever comes to work with us, I hope that they have a decent gut about people. Most of us know a good person when we assess them in the first couple seconds, right? I'm not being very articulate here, but trust your gut and know your passions. Two things to go by. I also think you're not going to be unhappy with yourself in the morning if you invested a little bit more than you had hoped to in a terrific founder serving an amazing community in what we call blue ocean, right? On that pie chart, blue ocean's that not crowded space. We care a lot about the idea. You have to like who you are in the mirror, and that's not about physical beauty. And so I think for me, that's a real guidepost. And for folks who call us looking to say, look, do you have any companies that would be right for this? That's a topic that we bring up, which is their appetite for this. We don't want them to regret it in the morning, but we do think that they're going to like themselves for going into this space that has a double set of virtues here.
Yeah, I would. So I'm going to answer it a little differently first, and that is taking a step back. We all are consumers, and the first step in investing consciously is, where do you spend your money? The next step is, where do you work? And some people have choice and some people don't, and that's not to diminish that at all. But there are a lot of great people who are where they are because of inertia. And there's an opportunity to get involved and lend talent to something that is more mission aligned, to Alexandra's point, that does tuck into what they're personally interested and passionate about. And, honestly, that alone is a tremendous area of growth for most of us. And just really understanding what the options are and being very intentional about the dollars we control, even at the monthly spend level. Beyond that, I would say, Lawrence has got the best view on the, next circle, which is IRAs, 401ks. Where do you put those dollars? And again, this is something where education is incredibly important because there's a lot of noise. And so how do you go about doing that? And Lawrence, you probably agree with this, but you have to look beyond the headline of what the fund is. Like you actually need to look at what they're invested in, because there's a lot of good marketing of these things out there as well. So again, from a, if you will, still at the consumer level in where you're deploying retirement focused dollars. Beyond that, as people have mentioned, whether it's seed investing or going into a fund or donor advised funds, or there's lots of options out there, but it's getting educated, making sure you understand what's real, and the earlier stage opportunities are definitely plentiful, but that's also where folks probably want to work with somebody who can help them dig into the details, because there are folks who it is marketing and it's not the core of who they are, and you need to have a process in place to be able to figure that out.
Yeah, that assessment filtering process is certainly important. I would love to hear from each of you what advice you might have for business owners who have embraced, these conscious values and are operating with them, so that they don't lose momentum in the current circumstance, whether they've now had to move to a remote situation, or if they are not able to work with their same, client portfolios in the same ways. What are some ways that they can keep that momentum going and support the communities that they have built based on those shared values?
Yeah, I'm happy to start.
Great.
And just a couple of things that, even we're doing internally, as an example, is when you're looking at budget allocation, continuing to fund whatever initiatives that you have going. Now, I will tell you the what of that budget is different, but that budget level remains the same, and the focus, if anything, we're actually increasing it internally. The other things that I've seen that I like is daily video huddles. We're all getting quite adept at Zoom and the like. And putting in practices of touching base and caring for the human side of what we do outside of the, report to me on project ABC and progress. We do a 30-minute touch base every day. The only rule is you can't talk about work until the last 5 minutes, when we do some quick project reviews and anything that we need to clean up with the team.
I would say on a business opportunities level, this is a bit of a time to re-SWOT, if you will. There's been some kaleidoscope shifting where businesses who may have been boxed out of certain opportunities or markets, this could be a place, because again, some pathways and some, roads in have been rendered easier in this moment. And, on a pure business opportunities level, you could find yourself decently positioned coming out of this if you work with folks who could try to help you figure out, is this a time to go, to re-swap my opportunities and to see where I could head on a pure business level. On a team level, I totally agree with Gary. We do a every morning touch base. When this first went down, we sent kind of self-care baskets to the whole team, lavender, eucalyptus, loofahs, I mean, you name it, the candles, kind of like, make your environment nice and lovely. And because it's important, we're all stuck in our homes now for 24/7. I also think, and Gary knows this is a big piece of us, we have always run a very, I think, a profound intern program. So we have 10 to 15 interns every semester, and we've kept them. We have kept them, that we're on intern calls with them. They're still in meetings with us, and we have kept those internships. We've just gone virtual. Over half of our interns are the first in family to go to college. The majority are diverse. They're not out of Ivy League schools, because that would be too easy, right? So, and that's not interesting. And again, who ends up in tech is about who starts. And if we're trying to shift the composition and compilation, then that's where you have to double down. And I want a hat tip to Gary here. Gary and I started talking about this 2 years ago. And he said, gosh, if there's ever anyone interesting, just let me know. And I said, well, actually. And last summer, Gary had Quentin, one of our extraordinary interns, who came out and worked with Gary's company. And Gary helped him. And Quentin now is headed to a major investment bank, in theory, this summer. But it's all about, people who care about these things and want to help propel lives forward. So I think, keep your interns, help them, in this moment. This is often their lifeline. They've got online learning, these kids, and then they've got talking about businesses and research and SWOTs and briefs, and keep them close. Gary's right, keep your investment piece, don't cut it down. Don't cut down the newest arrivals or the interns either. Keep them close to you. This is a moment to manifest those values as well.
And I'll chime in. So I'd say probably three things. One is humor. Next is why. And then the third will be, and Alexandra, I'm going to go right off what you said, the re-SWOT, right? So humor, if all of you were able to hear, my dogs wanted to answer that first part. I did a quick mute, and my gorgeous, beautiful, lovely wife, I wish you could have seen the scene, came down and escorted my dogs upstairs. So you got to remember to laugh, right? It's some of the best medicine in the world. And we've got a little saying at our company that when in doubt, play. And it works. It works wonderfully. The second is why. Why am I doing this? We talked about sleepwalking. The antithesis of sleepwalking is an intentional life of purpose and meaning. Okay, yes, a ruthless plug. I have a book coming out. I've been writing it for 12 years. So I have to say I think I can afford that after 12 years of writing a book. My wife tells me don't admit that in public. But it's coming out. It's called The Secret of the Seasons. And it's really about, when we have a season of waking like this, boy, it's such a wonderful opportunity to come back home, to reassess, which leads into what Alexandra was saying is re-SWOT, right? Mm-hmm. So if you know your why, nobody's there's no chance of failing. It's not an option. You're just gonna have to, maybe in a time like this, it's forcing you to re-SWOT what you're doing. Where are your priorities? Think of the things that you can trim off that you thought were so important, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, wait a minute, we didn't really need that. And I think all of that is just wrapping, everybody around you with that common purpose and care and love. One of the first things I did is I told everybody to go to the office weeks ago, like a month ago. I said, everybody go to the office and grab something from the office. Just bring it home. Whatever it is, I don't care. Take it off the walls, whatever makes you feel good. And boy, it was funny. It was really cool to see what some of the people took.
Yeah, that's I think one of your team members had shared with me that experience, and that was very meaningful for them, Lawrence. So to have that piece of office at home with them. And I just want to let our friends in the audience know, I've seen a few of you use the raise hand icon. I'm not able to call on you with the setup that we have, but if you have a question, you can type it into the Q&A box and we will field your questions that way. And I want to tap into what you just talked about, Lawrence, and really the build upon what each of you just shared. Really having an understanding of your why. And at Conscious Capitalism, we call that our higher purpose, that connection to your inner values. And I'd love to hear from each of you. You've all alluded to it in a different way, but what your why is and how you are practicing that in the current environment. So whether it's personal practices like the exercise that Lawrence, you helped us start off this session, or some other, routine or ritual, I think that, maybe it's humorous to pick up on another one of your key things there, or playful, but I think it's really helpful for folks to know that no matter what level of leadership you're at, we all have things that keep us going. And I think that's always helpful to hear from each other so that we know we're not alone in those scenarios. So whoever might feel compelled to start can, but a little bit more about your why and how you're staying true to that in these times would be great.
Don't everybody go at once.
We just saw Gary.
Sure. So my why is to bring more consciousness into finance. And, you know, the first step in that was a few years ago, pulling a team together to form Influence and having us focus a significant part of our business on mission-aligned companies. And that is relatively unique in the investment banking world. So much of the day-to-day revolves around that. Obviously, as you mentioned in my intro, the Mission Aligned Growth Summit, that's very much a community building exercise, which we appreciate the great partnership with Conscious Capitalism around doing. But, you know, I am, and not to diminish difficulty and suffering, but I'm just tremendously excited about the opportunity to reset within my industry. You know, inertia plays a big factor. I mentioned that before. That's very true in investment banking. And so this creates just a tremendous opportunity, and we're having a large number of conversations with folks who, you know, this period serves as a major break, doing some of that personal reswatting maybe, and reevaluation of what they want to spend their time doing from a investment banking opportunity perspective. We present a very unique proposition to speak to their value systems. And so we're looking at a number of ways to, you know, double down or more in growing the organization. At the core of that is really the question that, you know, if people know investment bankers, they'll get, and if they don't, might not. But bringing a consciousness, health, and wellness oriented culture into investment banking is a non-trivial enterprise. So people show up in bruised and battered often from the industry, and we're creating a trust-centric, wellness-oriented approach to the business, which is still, don't get me wrong, fierce in getting things done. But that's really got me excited. I'm as busy as ever. Also taking the appropriate pauses with my own internal reflections and shifts. But on the business side, that's a big part of where we are.
For us, the reason we do what we do is really twofold. We want to help extraordinary innovation grow and scale and reach its potential and get out to the wider world. And we also want to diversify the entrepreneurial and tech landscape. And those two things dovetail really well. I think working at home has been interesting. You know, like others on this call, I have kids. So the trick has been, you know, both to go every night at 7 p.m. with my husband and my children to the window, throw it open wide. And, you know, if everyone has seen, you know, bang on pots and pans for healthcare workers as all of New York becomes cacophonous at 7 p.m. at night as we're cheering for our healthcare workers and our first responders. There's that, which I find very uplifting. And we do it ritualistically every evening. To both finding those rituals, family rituals at home, which don't take a lot of time because there isn't a lot of time, but they're buoying and uplifting as well. And I think also in this moment, making sure that when we're talking to new founders or new clients, that we're also, because we can't be face-to-face with them right now, doing our best digitally even to have a little bit of a conversation to learn them as people. And that fabric, that connective tissue, feels important right now with anyone we're working with, it's also satisfying. So that's part of our why and our how.
And so from my why is that we are all here for a reason. And it is not some kind of like new age, book with a fancy title. We are truly all here for a reason, and we all matter. Each of us from a soul perspective is like a snowflake, no two are alike. And there's nothing more important, not only to us individually, but also to the whole fabric of the world for us to express that. And so what is the one thing that typically gets in the way of that? Money, right? This thing we created, right? I mean, if I had only had money, I would, right? Have we ever heard that before? And so the way I express this in my life is in the nexus of consciousness and capital. In conscious capital, of course, we focus on two things. One is money is useless beyond basic needs unless it's supporting your dreams and your purpose and reason for being here. And if you think that's weird, you're in the wrong place. Go somewhere else. And the second is, while you're at it, why not have it support your values and align with who you are? And you can do that. And that's something that is possible and to do responsibly. And then in my other panelists here, I also do work in leadership space, and that's with, as you mentioned at the beginning, Amanda, with United Nations and a little bit of work with the World Bank and the World Academy of Arts and Sciences. And it's this concept that the UN came to me a couple of years ago and said, would you like to lead this movement? They had my number. Of course, they knew, number one, I was crazy enough to say yes and crazy enough to not say no. But really around this nexus of consciousness and capital, when you think about it, it's not that far off. What are the two most powerful tools our species possess? One is our consciousness, everything that moves from us, from our thoughts out into the world, into actions. And this second thing called capital that's expressed, which is clearly the most powerful external tool man has created. And until we put those two in the same room together, we don't have the trajectory and sustainability to make change. That's the fundamental principle. Anybody who wants to, there's no membership or any stuff here. Anybody who wants to take a look at futureofcapital.org, come join us. We have some of the most extraordinary human beings around the globe. Gary, Alexandra, this is live. Be happy to coordinate with you. We've had discussions with Conscious Capitalism as well. All are welcome, and we all have a voice in that. So that's my big whys.
Thank you so much for that, Lawrence. And it really is a phenomenal and wide-reaching initiative. So excited to see who else might be joining on that journey after hearing about that a little bit from you. I'm going to direct our next question from the audience to you, Alexandra, because I think you're probably the best equipped with your work to answer this. But Lawrence and Gary, you can feel free to add on afterwards. Jake is asking us about how we can take companies that have these great ideas and might have a great why, but really help them embrace that so that they have more of that social and community focus. So being a firm that does a lot of business development, thought you might have some good advice here for Jake.
Sure. So when we talk to companies, and sometimes they come to us who have extraordinary innovations, but have less manifested that kind of socially conscious side, we talk about everything from the need to have philanthropic commitments and values as part of your website and actually as part of the company. So as Gary said earlier, it wasn't just marketing, right? It's real. I believe deeply in a really important and not window dressing intern program, right? Talking about ways that the executive team and everyone at the company might spend a little bit of pro bono time. So like we're doing these, 15-minute calls with anyone who calls up just to talk and see if we can be assistive initially. So I think those are three buckets, right? Philanthropic / charitable, manifested values, interns. I also, not everyone can do this. So I say that with that humility and recognition. I think you want to think about the clients you take. When I left being chief of staff at economic development for New York State, I was very fortunate to receive multiple very big offers and walked away from them. For several of them, I didn't like the values that I felt those companies purported to represent or not represent, and knew that it would take 80-hour weeks, and I didn't want to spend my time furthering those values or lack thereof. And so not everyone can do this. We've chosen, we're 12 on our senior team. We're not a behemoth. I think you have to decide who you want to be in the world. So I think if you're trying to become Goldman, right, this gets a little more complicated. Not impossible, but complicated. If you're smaller, I think all of us on this call can agree that you should select. When we were chatting the other day, getting ready for this panel, I said to Lawrence, part of my language, we have a no assholes policy. We just do, right? It's a gut check. You have to, I'm a lawyer by training. The Miller test on obscenity is, it when you see it, it when you see it. So I think, do you want to make people who you don't like very much wealthier if you're good at what you do? Not really. So I think all of those things, interns, charitable giving, how are you selecting clients? How are you using corporate time? Maybe those are 4 examples that could help Jake.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I know Lawrence and Gary, if you have anything else you want to add to that before we.
I have nothing to add to that. Gary, you go for it. That was perfect.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I think the only build on that I would have is there's often some aligning languaging in some of these initiatives where, back to a previous comment, I've met a lot of CEOs who I think are conscious capitalists and they don't know it. And so some key fundamental element of their business aligns with the stakeholder orientation of capitalism. And so like one super, I don't want to say anything easy, but it's one of the easier gets is around creating conscious culture. Right. And so if you're in an organization and you may not even need to, again, it depends on the environment and how comfortable people, throwing the word consciousness around in San Francisco is not that hard. Other places you may choose different words, but the fact is if you take some of the benefits of the stakeholder orientation, again, the example being culture, it's a differentiator in attracting talent. It's a differentiator in keeping talent. It's a differentiator when people work with meaning. There's often, you're not hiring the hired gun, as it were, so you can keep a realistic and fair wage structure in place without going after a superstar who needs to make every last dollar. So some of those sorts of, alignment using maybe slightly different terminology than some of us do on this call can be a good entry point for some of those conversations. And the last piece is just, don't ever be afraid to be a little subversive in inculcating that within wherever you are in an organization and seeing it catch a little bit of fire.
Yeah, thank you. So in our last few minutes here, I wanted to just give you each an opportunity to make some type of closing remark. I think there's so many topics that you could have explored. You guys have an amazing background of what you have done and the work that you're doing currently. I think there's lots of opportunities for folks to learn and connect with you. So if there's something that you had wanted to share and you didn't get a chance to, or if you want to let people know how to get in touch with you, we'll just go around and give that opportunity to each of you at this point. And maybe we can start with you, Alexandra.
I would love to, you have a whole variety of listeners here, and I'm sure they have extraordinary ideas, and I'm happy to talk with anyone. So I don't know, Amanda, you're going to throw up some information, or you'll be able to message out to folks
Yes.
about this, but we're happy to. I'm happy to chat with anyone who'd like a conversation about how we could be assistive. you have probably loads of ideas that we've never heard of. And what really gets us out of bed is extraordinary innovation. So we're happy to chat with anyone.
Great, thank you. And we will be sure to share your email with folks so they can get in touch with you. Lawrence, why don't you go next?
Okay. Staring down Gary to see who was going to go first. So, all right, it's 4:16. Do you know where your investments are? If you don't, being unconscious is not an excuse. Go find out, empower the world with your money if you have it. The second thing I would say is that, and it's been said by, Alexandra and Gary so beautifully. By the way, some panels get together, they all know each other for a while. It's my first round with Alexandra and Gary, and I love you guys. You're awesome. Amanda, I know you already, so of course I love you. Here's what I want to say to everybody. You've heard me talk about how life is short. You're here for a reason. All that stuff is so important. And Alexandra was saying it most recently in the panel here. Trust your instincts. Okay, so when you hear us speak, do you resonate? Do you like us? Does it feel good to be with us right now? Yeah. This is not some narcissistic rant. I'm looking for chat saying, yes, we love you. Trust you are. Because when you walk into a room, trust me, I practiced that for years in Wall Street. You walk into a room and your stomach goes, oh, and you go, ah. You go, oh, but I can do it. No. That never works out long run. You get sick, you get miserable, and you live a life of mediocrity. So just trust who you're around, trust your why, and surround yourself with really beautiful people because there's a lot out there doing great work, including you and Conscious Capitalism, Amanda. So thank you.
Thank you. There's a lot of folks on this call and in the audience doing great work for sure. And it's great to continue to be connected. So Gary will give you the last word, as they say on the panel, with what you'd like to share.
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to continue the theme of love for the panel and thank Lawrence and Alexandra and of course you, Amanda. And I really appreciate how on purpose we all are. And one of the things that I like to think about it is our attention follows our intention through most of the day, and that really resonates for me. Comes across, I think, in the panel. On the topic, I would just pull it back to the macro. Is money is an what you do with your money is an expression of your value system, and like everything, to be very, very intentional about what you do with it. Whether you're a billionaire family office doing direct investments, or you're like a lot of us somewhere other than that on the chain, and your expression is in your consumer or your retirement or an angel investor, every opportunity for dollars to flow is an opportunity for your value system to be expressed. And that's how I like to think about it.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great way to close out this conversation. Thank you to each of you, Alexandra, Lawrence, Gary. It has been a pleasure to connect with you here. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with the community. I know that we will all be in touch again soon.